Now we'll see if this works. Does this work?
Yes.
It's coming through better? Okay, good. You guys just thought that other mic was cutting out. That was my nerves cutting in and out on that. Doing things like this still doesn't come easy. But someone, someplace, is needing something that I have to offer. That is hard for me to fathom at times, but the sermon, the talk this morning, Take Nothing With You, comes from Luke 9, verses 2 and 3. He had sent them to preach the kingdom of God and to heal the sick. He said to them, Take nothing for the journey, neither staffs nor bag, nor bread, nor money, and do not have 2 tunics apiece. Why would Jesus send them out with these instructions? They already worked in a hard time. They had very little to begin with. But take nothing for the journey. Now, how do you take a journey without supplies? Supplies are necessary. Would you leave home without taking things that you think you may need? You have to have food and shelter and extra clothes. And all of these things would give us a sense of security, maybe, when we travel, knowing that, hey, we've got all this stuff. When Debbie and I travel, we take a big vehicle for the two of us because we take a lot of stuff. I think it's mostly me, too. Tools. I like tools. I know how to use tools. The disciples were told to take nothing for the journey, neither staffs, nor bag, nor bread. And the part there is they couldn't take a staff, a walking stick. And a walking stick is like a cell phone is to us today. Everybody has one. And the walking sticks were mostly attached to their hands, just like cell phones are attached to our hands now. Possibly, if they left home without their walking stick, they may turn around and go back and get it, just like we would do with our cell phones. If we forgot them at home, we would turn around and go back and get them so that we would feel more secure. But the walking stick, again, could be used to walk with, but it could also be used as a weapon against man, against beast, against snakes, against cell phones that ring when they're not supposed to. The rod or the staff has that perception of power for the one carrying it. And going to Exodus 17 and verse 8, it talks about Moses was leading Israel through the wilderness. Amalek came out to fight with Israel. Joshua was sent by Moses to fight the Amalekites. In verse 9, Moses had said, Tomorrow I will stand on top of the hill with the rod of God in my hand. In verse 11, it says, And so when Moses held up his hands with the rod, Israel prevailed. But when he got tired and he let his hands down, Amalek prevailed. The enemy prevailed. And this was the same rod that Moses had taken up when he first returned to Egypt to lead Israel out of bondage. This was the same rod that turned into a snake in front of Pharaoh, touched the river Nile, turned into blood, divided the waters of the Red Sea. So you can kind of see how the rod has some perception of power to it. And perhaps that's why Jesus had said, Take nothing for the journey, not even a staff. They had to be totally dependent on Him. Now I want to digress just a little bit. So if I get too far off, be sure and bring me back. But the verses 2 and 3 kind of brought a question that had been put to mind. In my mind, I connected the two things, even though they're this way from each other. But the subjects are related, but they are on opposite ends of the spectrum. On one end, you have Jesus telling the disciples to make this journey, but take nothing with them. And on the other side, it's you filling a bag with things you think you may need on a journey that you have no idea when it will take place or where it will even take you. The question that was put to me was, what do you put in to a bug out bag? And if you've never heard the term bug out bag, it has different connotations for different people. Some people will know it as a 72-hour bag, but basically it's meant to be a bag full of stuff that you can grab at a moment's notice and take with you if you have to. Everything that you may need for 72 hours should be in that bag. And you have to be able to carry the bag too. I know sometimes it's difficult to pack light. You have to have 12 pairs of shoes for a 2-day trip. So, I mean, but you have to be able to carry it. Now, I knew of these bags, but I didn't know much about them. So I turned to the official place to look for information. I went to YouTube. And what I found was somewhat confusing to me, because what I really wanted was just a list. Just put these things in there. This is what you need. And what I found, though, was you put the things in there that you know about. It doesn't matter what's on that list. If you don't know what that thing is, or what it's good for, or how to use it, don't take it. And it talked about first aid supplies, medicines, fishing equipment, and other things like that. Again, depends on which way you lean would determine what you put in there. Because, again, if you don't know how to use it, if you have never used it at home, never tried it, you know, think of flint and steel to start a fire with. Hundreds of years that's been used. Have you ever tried to use it? No. Our Pathfinders have tried to use it when we've taken them camping. And it's not that easy to do. So practice those things. You know, don't just put it in a bag and say, oh, I'm good. Now, who you are and what scares you the most also helps to determine what goes into this bag. Some bags can be designed to actually flee to the wilderness and live out there. And I'll go into that in just a little bit. But what that implies is that things are really bad for society, and you feel some need to be able to get away from people. Now, there's other bags that can be designed to take to a shelter, like in times of a storm, a hurricane, a flood, or a train derailment that causes a chemical spill. And I say that because I've lived on the Gulf Coast for a long time, and in Houston, and you hear about these refineries where trains will be derailed and just poisonous things coming from it. So the bags are designed there that you can just pick them up and take them with you. First aid things, how about some, I know you'll have a headache when you go into a shelter like that, so aspirin, things like that, Pepto-Bismol, just things that you may not want to have to chase down, but just have right there with you. Now, obviously, you don't need the same things to take to a shelter as you would if you went to the wilderness. But the one absolute item, and I didn't see this mentioned anywhere on those official YouTube videos, all 2 of them that I watched. I didn't see this item listed anywhere, but I'd say that the absolute item that needs to go with you is a Bible. It doesn't have to be a big one, but it does have to be big enough to where you can read it. And the older I get, the bigger the Bible gets. So take that into consideration. But before you put too much money and too much thought, and I know you guys have been thinking about these bug out bags a lot, I can tell. But before you put too much into that, I had 4 questions that came up. When was the last time that you slept on the ground? With the bugs and the rocks and the cold ground. When was the last time you were outside for days on end when it's 100 degrees? Or maybe days on end when it's 40 degrees and raining? Where would I go? Here in New Braunfels, we could bug out to Landa Park, maybe? Nah, everybody else has the same idea. West Texas, maybe? Idaho. Everybody will go to Idaho. But where would you go? And you have to think about that. And when was the last time that you actually carried everything you would need on your back through rough country? Not from the store to the house and back, but where you actually had to carry it. So as you see, there's some big questions to ask yourselves before getting too serious into this, because there's all kinds of people out there that are very happy to take your money and your time to do this. Now, I'm not saying that these bags are good. I'm not saying that they're bad. But I will go back to the main story now. The disciples were being sent out by Jesus. Now, they had gotten into their comfort zone with Jesus over the months that they had been together. Now, their comfort zone was a bit on the rustic side, by our standards anyway, but they were young and strong. Some would say they're young and invincible. They probably would. And they could handle the hardships of living with small material things. So they normally carried with them things that they would need to deal with problems as they arose. But Jesus here was sending them out with nothing, not even the meager things that they had to begin with. No staff, no bag, no money, no extra sandals, nor 2 tunics. Why would he say not 2 tunics? Was it too hot to carry 2 of them? In a little bit of research I did on this, I read where a tunic was an inner garment. 2 tunics, you would have one over the other one, and you'd have a tied around the waist. The one tunic, in some circles, was considered as inappropriate dress. So did that lower the disciples even further down with what they had to take on this journey? They were going out empty-handed. They were empty-handed. Had no pockets to put things in. I got lots of things in my pockets. But they had nothing. But they were not empty. They were given the power, as it says in Matthew 10, verse 8, to heal the sick, cleanse the lepers, raise the dead, and cast out demons. Freely you have received, so freely give. But why would they be sent out without anything else besides that? Do you think they were nervous about going out in the wilderness into someplace different without having their customary security with the rod and maybe their knapsack with food and some water in it? I would think they would be. But I'd read that somebody come up with 3 reasons that for this maybe. This would be to increase their faith in God's provision for them, to let them know that He is able to take care of them even when they don't have the things surrounding them that they would like to have. So they would not be unduly burdened in their travels, to allow them to travel easier, allow them to travel faster, maybe allow them to travel further and to be able to carry the message further. But also there was some anticipation. Now, before I go to that one, this is kind of negative, but it would also allow them to flee persecution when it arises. They had nothing that they had to reach back to get or circle back around to get. What they had was on them, and they could just go. But also there was the anticipation of the support of those that they met to be able to feed and to house them and to take them in. Now, how did this exercise work for them? How did this journey into places that they had not been with nothing except the tunic, how did that work for them? In Luke chapter 9, verse 10, it says, And the apostles, when they had returned, told him all that they had done. And it's my guess that they would have been tremendously excited because they were able to heal people and see the results. They were able to cast out demons and see the results of that. And they had done all this in the name of Jesus. But then he took them aside and went privately into a deserted place. But the multitudes found this out and they followed him. And Jesus preached to them, talked to them most of the day. And towards the end of the day, Jesus had asked the disciples to feed the 5,000 people that were there. And they were looking in their, no pockets, no knapsack, no food. What are we going to feed them with? And no money to buy it with. Send them away. But Jesus says, what food do you have? And they brought 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish amongst 5,000 people. Jesus took these and raised the 5 loaves and the 2 fish towards heaven. He blessed them and broke them and gave them to the disciples to disperse to the 5,000 people. There was more than enough for all of them with multiple food left over. So did the journey strengthen their resolve to follow Christ? It did. Did it take them to where Jesus had wanted them? Not quite. But each one of these 12 men were forever changed by these experiences. Even though each one still had a long journey ahead of them, they were learning to claim that spiritual strength from Jesus. In Luke 10, verse 1, Jesus again sent some people out just like that. Don't take anything with you. He sent 70 people out, 2 by 2. Same instructions. No money, no bag, no sandals. How did the 70 do, again, with the preaching and the healing that they were sent to do? In Luke 10:17, it says that the 70 returned with joy, saying, Lord, even the demons are subject to us in your name. They were excited. They were pleased. Almost like, look what we did. And Jesus reminds them in verse 20 that do not rejoice in this, that the spirits are subject to you. Do not rejoice that the spirits are subject to you, but rather rejoice because your names are written in heaven. Jesus was pleased with their excitement about their successes, but he redirected their enthusiasm towards heaven and away from the spirits that they had cast out. The focus is on heaven and not the spirits. He was saying it's more important to have your name written in heaven than to cast out demons. And what a blessing he gave to each one of them, saying that your names are written in heaven. Now, Jesus wasn't blind to the dangers that he was sending his disciples into. When he asked them to take nothing on their journey, this was their first missionary trip. This was the first time that they went out on their own to preach the message, to heal the sick and cast out the demons. They encountered many trials, and they also encountered many good things, many good experiences. But Jesus used these experiences to strengthen their relationship with him. And through their trust in him, they lacked nothing while they were traveling. And Jesus knew that it would be a dangerous world to them. They had to be prepared for the things they would face in the future, things that they weren't even aware of. He wanted them to learn there is strength in having trust and faith in him. Luke 22, verse 35, had said that the disciples said they lacked nothing when they put their faith in Jesus and went out on these journeys as they were directed. But then Jesus says in verse 36, he says, but now, he's kind of changing the game a little bit. He who has a money bag, let him take it, and likewise a knapsack. And he who has no sword, let him sell his garment and buy one, which seems a little off to one side. But Jesus is saying it's okay if you don't have a bug-out bag to take with you. He can take care of you. But it's also okay if you do have a bug-out bag, because the world is a mean and dangerous place that we live in. Be prepared to live in this world. Be aware of your surroundings. But more than that, keep Jesus foremost in your mind and your thoughts. Keep in mind that time on this earth is short. Eternity is forever. Are we living for the earth, or are we living for eternity? That'll help direct you. Now, in closing, I would also like to share something that Wayne had sent out, I think it was yesterday. Because we all have good days. We all have bad days. And we have days in between. These exactly like the disciples had. Good days, bad days, and just normal days. But if we keep practicing these things, as the disciples did also, you will see the results in your life. And what Wayne had sent was a short list, and I'm going to add just a little bit to it. Remember that no matter what else is happening in your day, keep believing in God. Keep trusting in God. Keep seeking your relationship with God. Keep loving as Jesus did. Keep praying as Jesus taught. Keep praising God's goodness for each one of us. And then leave the rest to God, and He'll figure it out. Our closing song, and I'll ask for David if he'll come up and lead us, is number 512.